The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, casting sharp shadows between the weathered buildings. Sarah McKenna adjusted her worn calico bonnet and clutched the small leather pouch containing her meager savings, barely $8 earned from selling her late husband's tools. The auction crowd gathered around Jameson's general store buzzed with anticipation, ranchers and townspeople eyeing the various goods laid out on wooden tables. "Next item," called out Ezra Jameson, the portly auctioneer, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversations. "This here covered wagon belonged to the Patterson family before the Apache got 'em last month." A somber silence fell over the crowd as people instinctively stepped back from the weathered Conestoga wagon with its faded canvas top. Sarah's heart raced as she studied the wagon. Despite its worn appearance, the wooden frame looked solid, and the iron-rimmed wheels showed minimal damage. She desperately needed transportation to haul supplies from town to her struggling ranch, 15 miles northwest. Her old mule could barely manage the journey carrying just herself, let alone the feed and provisions she required to keep her small cattle operation alive. "Do I hear $5? Jameson's eyes swept the crowd hopefully. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, whispered loudly to her companion, "Cursed thing, if you ask me. Poor Pattersons were found scalped not 2 miles from here." Several men nodded grimly, their hands unconsciously moving to their gun belts. $4? Jameson's voice carried a note of desperation. The Patterson massacre had been brutal, and superstition ran deep in the territory. "This is good quality workmanship, folks. Don't let fear cloud your judgment." Sarah took a deep breath. She knew the townspeople's reluctance stemmed from more than just superstition. Apache raids had intensified over the past months, and tensions between the indigenous tribes and white settlers reached a boiling point. But she also knew opportunity when she saw it. $3, she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Heads turned in her direction. Some faces showed disapproval. A widow woman had no business owning such a large wagon. Others displayed pity for her obvious desperation. Sheriff Morrison, a grizzled man with steel-gray hair, frowned deeply. "Sarah, you sure about this? That wagon's seen trouble. Might be better to leave it be." "I can handle trouble, Sheriff," Sarah replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "I've been managing my ranch alone for 2 years since Thomas passed. I need transportation, and I can't afford to be particular." Jameson looked around hopefully for other bidders, but the crowd remained silent. The combination of superstition and Sarah's obvious need created an uncomfortable atmosphere. After a long moment, he sighed and brought down his gavel. "Sold to Mrs. McKenna for $3. As Sarah counted out her coins into Jameson's palm, she could feel the disapproving stares of the other townspeople. Martha Collins, the preacher's wife, shook her head sadly. "That poor child. Living out there all alone, it ain't natural. And now this cursed wagon—" "It's just wood and canvas," Sarah said firmly, though she couldn't entirely suppress a shiver as she approached her purchase. The wagon did have an ominous presence, its canvas darkened with age and what looked like old bloodstains. Old Pete Williams, who ran the livery stable, shuffled forward. "I'll help you hitch it up, Mrs. McKenna. Got a good strong horse here that'll pull it just fine." His weathered face showed kindness mixed with concern. "You sure you want to drive that thing out to your place alone? Sun's getting low and it's a long ride." "I'll be fine, Pete. I've got my rifle and I know the trail well enough." Sarah ran her hands along the wagon's side rails, testing their stability. The wood felt solid beneath her palms, despite its scarred appearance. As Pete brought out a sturdy bay horse and began hitching it to the wagon, Sarah climbed up to examine the interior. The canvas cover was secured tightly with rope, creating a dim, enclosed space. She untied the rear flap and peered inside, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. The wagon bed was empty except for some old blankets and what appeared to be discarded supplies, a broken water barrel, some scattered cooking utensils, and a torn saddlebag. The wood showed dark stains that she preferred not to examine too closely. Despite the grim reminders of its previous owner's fate, the wagon would serve her purposes well. "All set, Mrs. McKenna," Pete announced, securing the last of the harness buckles. "This old bay's reliable. He'll get you home safe." Sarah thanked him and climbed onto the driver's seat, taking up the reins. The leather felt familiar in her hands. She'd driven wagons before, helping Thomas with ranch work. As she guided the horse out of town, she could feel eyes watching her departure, with a mixture of concern and resignation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape as Sarah urged the horse onto the familiar trail home. Sagebrush and mesquite dotted the rolling hills, while distant mountains created a purple silhouette against the burning sky. The wagon creaked rhythmically as it rolled over the rutted path, a sound that would have been comforting under different circumstances. Despite her brave words in town, Sarah felt increasingly uneasy as the miles passed. The approaching dusk painted the landscape in ominous shades of red and gold, and she found herself frequently checking over her shoulder. Apache war parties had been active in this region, and a lone woman with a slow-moving wagon made an easy target. The familiar outline of her small ranch buildings finally came into view as darkness fell. The modest cabin, barn, and corral looked welcoming after the tense journey, though the isolation that usually comforted her now felt more pronounced. Sarah guided the wagon to a stop near the barn and unhitched the horse, leading him to water and feed before securing him in the corral. Only then did she turn her attention back to the wagon, which sat like a dark sentinel in the moonlight. Tomorrow she would thoroughly clean it out and put it to good use hauling supplies. Tonight she was simply grateful to be home safely. As she walked toward her cabin, Sarah had no idea that her $3 purchase would change her life forever. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Sarah's ranch, painting the desert landscape in soft pastels. She had slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by images of the Patterson family and their tragic fate. Rising early as was her habit, she dressed quickly in her practical brown wool dress and stepped outside to tend to her livestock. The wagon sat where she'd left it the previous evening, its canvas cover damp with morning dew. In daylight, it looked less ominous but still carried the weight of its dark history. Sarah fed her chickens and milked her lone cow, all while keeping one eye on her new purchase. She would need to clean it thoroughly before putting it to use. After a quick breakfast of cornbread and coffee, Sarah gathered her cleaning supplies, a bucket of water, lye soap, and several old rags. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. She approached the wagon with determined steps, untying the rope that secured the rear canvas flap. "Might as well start from the back and work forward," she murmured to herself, pulling the heavy canvas aside to let sunlight flood the wagon bed. What she saw made her heart stop. A man lay motionless among the old blankets, his bronzed skin gleaming in the morning light. His long black hair was braided with leather cord and small feathers, and intricate blue tattoos marked his muscular chest and arms. He wore buckskin leggings and moccasins, but his torso was bare except for a beaded leather band across his broad shoulders. Even in unconsciousness, his face held the proud, angular features characteristic of the Apache. Sarah stumbled backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she'd left in the cabin. Her breathing came in short gasps as her mind raced. An Apache warrior, hidden in her wagon. How long had he been there? Was this a trap? Were there others nearby? But as her initial terror subsided, she noticed details that gave her pause. Dark stains on the blankets beneath him suggested blood, and his breathing appeared shallow and labored. A makeshift bandage, now soaked through, was wrapped around his left shoulder. Another binding encircled his right thigh. This wasn't an ambush. This was a wounded man seeking shelter. Sarah crept closer, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would wake him. In the full light of day she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30. His face, relaxed in unconsciousness, showed exhaustion and pain rather than the fierce expression she might have expected. A thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead, suggesting fever. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The sound seemed to penetrate his unconsciousness. His eyes fluttered open, dark brown, almost black, and immediately alert, despite his weakened condition. When his gaze focused on her face, his body tensed, and his hand moved toward a knife sheathed at his belt. "Don't," Sarah said quickly, raising her hands to show she was unarmed. "You're hurt. I won't harm you." He studied her face intently, his expression unreadable. When he tried to sit up, a groan escaped his lips and fresh blood seeped through the shoulder bandage. The effort left him dizzy, and he fell back against the blankets. "I'll need a doctor," Sarah said, then realized how foolish that sounded. No doctor in Copper Ridge would treat an Apache, and bringing this man to town would likely result in a lynching. "I mean, your wounds need tending." He watched her warily, understanding her English but showing no inclination to respond. His breathing was labored, and she could see the fever burning in his dark eyes. Whatever had happened to him, he was in serious condition. "I'm Sarah," she said softly, pointing to herself, "Sarah McKenna, this is my ranch." She gestured toward the cabin and barn. "You're safe here for now." Still, he remained silent, though she noticed his grip on the knife handle had relaxed slightly. His eyes never left her face, searching for any sign of deception or threat. Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct the frontier had taught her. "I'm going to get some fresh water and bandages. You need medical attention, regardless of everything else." She backed away slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening. In the cabin, she gathered her limited medical supplies: clean cloth, whiskey for disinfecting, needle and thread, and her late husband's laudanum for pain. Her hands shook as she worked, the magnitude of her situation becoming clear. She was harboring an Apache warrior on her property. If Sheriff Morrison discovered this, she would be branded a traitor to her own people. The townspeople already viewed her with suspicion for living alone. This would confirm their worst fears about her judgment. But the alternative, turning away a wounded man to die, went against everything her Christian upbringing had taught her. When she returned to the wagon, she found him struggling to sit up again, his face pale with effort. Blood had soaked through more of his bandages, and his breathing was increasingly shallow. "Please," she said, setting down her supplies. "Let me help. I've treated wounded animals and my husband when he was injured. I know something about gunshot wounds." The warrior's eyes widened slightly at her words. He understood more English than he was letting on. After a long moment, he gave an almost imperceptible nod and allowed himself to sink back onto the blankets. Sarah climbed into the wagon bed, her heart racing. She had no idea what she was doing, but she couldn't stand by and watch him suffer. As she reached for the soaked bandage on his shoulder, their eyes met. In that moment, she saw not a fearsome Apache warrior, but a young man in pain who needed help. "This is going to hurt," she warned, beginning to unwrap the crude dressing. He clenched his jaw and nodded, preparing himself for her ministrations. As Sarah began her work, she wondered what chain of events had brought this wounded warrior to seek refuge in a wagon she'd purchased for $3. More importantly, she wondered what would happen when someone discovered he was here. The morning sun climbed higher, casting dancing shadows through the canvas as Sarah McKenna began the most dangerous and unexpected chapter of her life. For 3 days, Sarah tended to the wounded Apache warrior in secret, moving between her daily chores and caring for her unexpected patient. She had learned his name was Aiyana, which he'd whispered during a fevered delirium, meaning eternal blossom in his native tongue. The irony wasn't lost on her that such a gentle name belonged to someone the townspeople would consider their mortal enemy. The bullet wound in his shoulder had been the most serious, requiring her to dig out fragments of lead with her husband's old tweezers, while Aiyana gritted his teeth in silent agony. His stoic endurance amazed and humbled her. The thigh wound was cleaner, having passed through muscle without striking bone, but infection had set in before she'd found him. "You're lucky," she murmured on the third morning, checking his temperature with the back of her hand. His fever had finally broken during the night. "Another day and you might have been beyond help." Aiyana's dark eyes followed her movements as she changed his dressings. He had begun to trust her ministrations, no longer tensing when she approached, though he remained watchful and alert to any sounds from beyond the wagon. "Sarah," he said suddenly, his voice rough from disuse. It was the first time he'd spoken her name, and hearing it in his deep accented English sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Yes?" She looked up from wrapping clean bandages around his shoulder. "Why do you help me?" His English was better than she'd expected, though he spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Your people and mine, we are enemies." Sarah paused in her work, considering his question. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "I couldn't just let you die." "Many of your people would." She couldn't deny the truth of that statement. "Yes, many would, but I'm not many people." She secured the bandage and sat back on her heels. "How did you come to be in this wagon? Were you hiding when the Pattersons were—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. A shadow passed over Aiyana's features. "I was not with the warriors who attacked them. I was hunting alone when I heard the shooting." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I found the family already dead. Then the cavalry patrol came and they saw me near the bodies. They assumed—" He gestured weakly at his wounds. "They shot you for being Apache." "They shot me for being Apache near dead white people," he corrected grimly. "I crawled into the wagon to hide. When they took it to your town, I could not escape without being seen." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. The wagon had sat in the town square for several days before the auction, with Aiyana hiding inside, wounded and slowly weakening. The realization of what he'd endured made her chest tight with sympathy. "You could have died," she said softly. "Yes, I thought I would." His eyes met hers. "Then you bought the wagon." "I thought a woman alone might be less dangerous than the men in town." "Were you right?" For the first time since she'd found him, Aiyana's stern expression softened into something that might have been a smile. "You tell me, Sarah McKenna." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle sounds of her ranch. Chickens clucking, her cow lowing in the distance, the whisper of wind through the canvas. But their peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Someone's coming," she whispered, immediately moving to secure the wagon's canvas flaps. "Stay quiet. Don't move." She jumped down from the wagon and walked toward her cabin, trying to appear casual despite her racing heart. Two riders approached from the east, Sheriff Morrison and Deputy Collins. Sarah's mouth went dry. If they decided to search her property— "Morning, Sarah," Sheriff Morrison called out, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Hope we're not disturbing you." "Not at all, Sheriff. What brings you out this way?" Sarah kept her voice steady, though she was acutely aware of the wagon sitting just 30 yards away. "We've been tracking Apache sign in this area," Deputy Collins said, his young face serious. "Found evidence of a wounded warrior. Blood trail leads in this direction." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Apache? Here?" She hoped her voice conveyed appropriate concern rather than terror. "Might be the same buck who was with the war party that hit the Patterson place," Morrison continued, his weathered face grim. "Cavalry wounded one of them during the fight. We figure he's holed up somewhere nearby." "Have you checked the hills to the north?" Sarah suggested, pointing away from her property. "Plenty of caves and rock formations for someone to hide in." "We will, but first we'd like to look around here, if you don't mind." Morrison's tone was polite, but firm. "A wounded Apache is dangerous, Sarah. Desperate men do desperate things." Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion, but allowing them to search meant certain discovery. "Of course, Sheriff, though I haven't seen any sign of, well, anything unusual." As the two men began walking toward her barn, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye. The wagon's canvas flap had shifted slightly, just enough to show that Aiyana was awake and listening. Their eyes met for a brief second across the distance, and she saw him nod once almost imperceptibly. He understood the danger. "Fine-looking wagon," Deputy Collins commented as they passed it. "Heard you bought the Patterson rig at auction." "Yes. I needed something to haul supplies from town," Sarah replied, her voice sounding unnaturally high to her own ears. Morrison paused near the wagon, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. "Shame what happened to that family. Good people. The Pattersons." His hand rested casually on his gun butt. "Mind if we take a look inside?" Sarah's world seemed to slow to a crawl. Everything she'd risked, everything she'd done to help Aiyana, was about to be discovered. She opened her mouth to respond, though she had no idea what she could possibly say to prevent the inevitable. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the sound of cattle lowing in distress. Sarah's small herd, grazing in the north pasture, was clearly agitated about something. "What's that?" Morrison's attention immediately shifted toward the sound. "Sounds like something spooked the cattle," Sarah said, seizing the opportunity. "Maybe a coyote or whatever you're tracking." The two men exchanged glances. The cattle were clearly in distress, their calls growing more urgent. "We better check that out first," Morrison decided. "Could be our Apache trying to steal some beef." As the sheriff and deputy mounted their horses and rode toward the commotion, Sarah remained by the wagon, her knees weak with relief. She didn't know what had frightened her cattle, but she silently blessed whatever providence had intervened. Minutes passed like hours before the lawmen returned, their faces showing frustration. "Just a rattlesnake," Morrison reported. "Big Diamondback had them all worked up. No sign of any Apache." "Well, thank goodness for that," Sarah managed. After a few more minutes of conversation and promises to keep her eyes open for anything suspicious, the sheriff and deputy departed. Sarah waited until they were completely out of sight before approaching the wagon. "That was close," she whispered, as she untied the canvas flap. Aiyana's face was pale but composed. "Too close," he agreed. "I must leave soon. My presence here endangers you." "You're not strong enough yet," Sarah protested. "Your wounds will heal or they won't. But if they find me here, we both die." His dark eyes were serious. "You have shown great kindness, Sarah McKenna. I will not repay it by bringing death to your door." Sarah stared at him, realizing that somewhere in the past 3 days, Her feelings toward this man had changed completely. He was no longer just a wounded stranger she was helping. He had become someone she genuinely cared about. The thought of him leaving, possibly to die alone in the desert, filled her with unexpected anguish. "Give me one more day," she said quietly. "Let me make sure the infection is completely gone. Then, if you must go." She left the sentence unfinished. Aiyana studied her face for a long moment, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. "One more day," he agreed. Neither of them spoke of what they both understood, that one more day might not be nearly enough. That evening, as Sarah brought Aiyana his supper of cornbread and rabbit stew, she found him sitting up properly for the first time, his back against the wagon's side rail. The improvement in his condition was remarkable. The fever was completely gone, and color had returned to his bronze skin. "You look much better," she said, settling beside him in the wagon bed. The intimacy of sharing the confined space no longer felt awkward. Somehow, over the past few days, it had begun to feel natural. "I feel stronger," he admitted, accepting the tin plate from her hands. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. "Your medicine is powerful." "My grandmother's recipe," Sarah said softly. "She always said healing required more than just herbs and bandages. It required caring." Aiyana paused in his eating, studying her face in the lamplight. "You cared for me when you had every reason to fear me. Why?" Sarah considered the question she'd been asking herself for days. At first it was just the right thing to do. Christian charity, I suppose, but now she trailed off, unable to voice the growing feelings that confused and frightened her. "Now?" he prompted gently. "Now I don't want you to leave." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Aiyana set down his plate and reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "Sarah McKenna," he said quietly, "you are not like other white women I have known." "I've never known any Apache men before you," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "I thought you would all be different, savage. That's what everyone says." "And what do you think now?" Sarah looked into his dark eyes, seeing intelligence, kindness, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "I think people see what they want to see, what they expect to see." She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. "I see a man who endured terrible pain without complaint, who protects me even when he's wounded, who speaks gently and looks at me like I matter." "You do matter," Aiyana said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than you know." The space between them seemed to shrink until Sarah could feel the warmth of his breath against her face. When his lips touched hers, it was with infinite tenderness, as if he were afraid she might disappear. Sarah had been kissed before, by her late husband, by suitors in her youth, but never like this. Never with this sense of two souls recognizing something profound in each other. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "This is dangerous," Sarah whispered, though she made no move to pull away. "Everything about this is dangerous," Aiyana replied, his forehead resting against hers. "But some things are worth the risk." They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders this time, moving fast. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voices carrying across the desert air. "Spread out! Check every building, every hiding place!" Sheriff Morrison's voice boomed with authority. "That Apache's around here somewhere, I can feel it in my bones." Sarah quickly extinguished the lamp and peered through a gap in the canvas. At least 6 riders circled her property, including Morrison, Deputy Collins, and several men she recognized from town. They carried torches and rifles, their faces grim with purpose. "Someone must have seen something," she whispered to Aiyana, who had already grabbed his knife and was preparing for the worst, "or found more tracks." "I will not let them harm you," he said quietly, his warrior's instincts taking over despite his weakened condition. "And I won't let them take you," Sarah replied with fierce determination. The riders were systematically searching every structure on her property. She watched through the canvas as they checked the barn, the chicken coop, even the small root cellar behind her cabin. It was only a matter of minutes before they reached the wagon. "Mrs. McKenna," Morrison called out, "we need to search your property more thoroughly. We have reason to believe that Apache is hiding nearby." Sarah climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady. "Of course, Sheriff. Whatever you need to do." She walked toward the approaching men, deliberately drawing their attention away from the wagon. "We found more blood sign down by Miller's Creek," Deputy Collins explained. "Trail leads right back this direction. That buck's definitely in this area." As the men continued their methodical search, Sarah noticed young Tommy Patterson, the nephew of the murdered family, among the group. His face was twisted with grief and rage, his rifle held ready for action. "Find him," Tommy snarled. "I want to look the savage in the eye before I put a bullet in him. He was there when my uncle's family died." "I know it." Sarah's heart ached for the boy's loss, but she also knew the truth. Aiyana had found the family already dead. He was innocent of their murders, but that wouldn't matter to these men. In their minds, Apache meant guilty. "Now, Tommy," Morrison said calmly, "we'll handle this according to the law." "The law?" Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "What law protected my family? What law's going to bring them back?" The group was moving closer to the wagon. Sarah's mind raced, searching for any distraction, any way to protect the man she was rapidly falling in love with. Then inspiration struck. "Sheriff," she called out, her voice carrying a note of urgency. "I just remembered something. This afternoon while you were here earlier, I thought I heard something in the old mine shaft up in the hills. It sounded like, well, like someone moving around up there." Morrison's attention sharpened. "The abandoned silver mine. That's a good hiding spot for someone who knows the area." "It's possible," Sarah continued, hating herself for the deception, but seeing no alternative. "The entrance is partially concealed by brush. Someone could easily hide there during the day." The sheriff considered this information, weighing it against their current search. "It's worth checking out," he decided. "Collins, take half the men and head up to the mine. I'll finish searching the buildings here." As Deputy Collins and 3 others rode off toward the hills, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and growing panic. She had bought some time, but Morrison and the remaining men were still on her property, and the wagon remained unsearched. "Mrs. McKenna," Morrison said, walking directly toward the covered wagon, "this belonged to the Patterson family." "Yes, I bought it at auction, as you know." Sarah's voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Apache sometimes hide in the strangest places. Sarah's world began to collapse around her. There was no way to prevent this search, no distraction left to employ. In moments, Morrison would discover Aiyana, and both their lives would be forfeit. "Of course," she heard herself saying, though the words seemed to come from someone else entirely. As Morrison reached for the wagon's canvas ties, Sarah caught sight of Aiyana through a small gap in the fabric. Their eyes met one final time, and she saw him mouth the words "thank you" before gripping his knife and preparing to fight for both their lives. The sheriff's weathered hands began to untie the canvas flap, and Sarah closed her eyes, preparing for the inevitable explosion of violence that would follow. Everything they had built together, all the trust, the growing love, the hope for something beautiful in this harsh land, was about to end in bloodshed. But sometimes the frontier had its own sense of justice. As Sheriff Morrison's fingers worked at the canvas ties, the sound of galloping horses thundered across the desert from the direction of town. A rider approached at breakneck speed, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. Morrison paused in his search, squinting into the darkness. "Sheriff Morrison." The rider pulled up hard, his mount sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust. It was Billy Henderson from the telegraph office, his young face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. "Emergency message just came through from Fort Apache." Morrison stepped away from the wagon, his attention completely captured. "What kind of emergency?" Billy fumbled with a crumpled telegraph paper, his hands shaking from the hard ride. "It's about the Patterson murders, Sheriff. The Army caught the real war party responsible, 4 Apache warriors, led by a renegade called Black Wolf. They were raiding down south when they hit the Patterson place. The words hit the search party like a thunderbolt. Tommy Patterson stepped forward, his rifle lowering slightly. "Are you certain? They caught the ones who killed my family?" "Yes, sir," Billy confirmed, still catching his breath. "The telegram says they found items belonging to your uncle's family in their possession. Personal effects, your aunt's jewelry, things that could only have come from the homestead." Morrison took the telegraph message and read it by torchlight, his weathered face growing thoughtful. "Says here the Army's been tracking this particular band for weeks. Black Wolf and his men were nowhere near here when we found that blood trail." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief, though she struggled not to show it. Inside the wagon, she knew Aiyana was listening to every word, probably experiencing his own mixture of relief and vindication. "So, the Apache we've been tracking," Deputy Collins said slowly, having returned from the fruitless search of the mine. "Probably just some lone warrior passing through," Morrison concluded. "Maybe wounded in a hunting accident, or a skirmish with another tribe. Point is, he's not connected to the Patterson murders." Tommy Patterson's face crumpled as the news sank in. The rage that had been sustaining him suddenly transformed into overwhelming grief. "They're really gone," he whispered. "And now the ones who did it are caught." The older men in the search party moved to comfort the young man, their own bloodlust diminished by the revelation that they'd been hunting an innocent man. The atmosphere shifted from vengeful determination to awkward uncertainty. "I suppose we should call off the search," Morrison said after a long moment. "Whoever's out there, he's not our concern anymore. The real killers are in army custody." "What about the wounded Apache?" one of the townsmen asked. Morrison shrugged. "If he's just passing through, he'll move on when he's able. If he dies from his wounds—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. One less Apache wasn't going to keep anyone awake at night. As the search party prepared to depart, Sarah struggled to maintain her composure. The danger had passed, but she was almost dizzy with the emotional whiplash of terror, followed by salvation. "So you be careful out here, Mrs. McKenna," Morrison said as he mounted his horse. "Just because this particular Apache wasn't involved with the Pattersons doesn't mean you're safe living alone. Maybe you should consider moving to town." "I'll be fine, Sheriff," Sarah managed. "I've got my rifle and I know how to use it." After the last rider disappeared into the darkness, Sarah stood motionless for several minutes, hardly daring to believe they were truly safe. When she finally approached the wagon, her hands were trembling as she untied the canvas flap. Aiyana sat in the darkness, his knife still in his hand, but his posture relaxed. "They are gone?" he asked quietly. "They're gone," Sarah confirmed, climbing into the wagon beside him. "And Aiyana, you're cleared of the Patterson murders. The real killers have been caught." For a moment, neither spoke. The magnitude of what had just transpired was almost too much to absorb. Then Aiyana set aside his knife and pulled Sarah into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "I thought they would find me," he whispered into her hair. "I thought this was the end." "So did I," Sarah admitted, clinging to him. "I was so afraid I'd lose you." They held each other in the darkness of the wagon, both shaking with relief and the aftermath of terror. But gradually, their embrace changed from desperate comfort to something deeper. When Aiyana tilted her face up to his, the kiss they shared was filled with all the emotion they hadn't been able to express during the days of hiding and danger. "Sarah," he said against her lips, "I must tell you something." She pulled back slightly to look at his face. "What is it?" "My full name is Aiyana Taza. I am not just a warrior. I am the son of Chief Cochise's brother. My uncle sent me to scout the movements of the army, to see if peace might still be possible between our peoples." Sarah's eyes widened. Aiyana was Apache nobility, a man of significant importance to his tribe. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if we are to be together, you must understand what that means." His dark eyes were serious. "I can never fully live in your world, Sarah. The white man's towns will never accept me. But you could come with me. Live with my people as my wife." The proposal hung between them like a bridge spanning two worlds. Sarah thought of her ranch, her life, everything she'd known since coming to Arizona territory. Then she looked at Aiyana, this brave, gentle man who had shown her a love deeper than anything she'd ever imagined possible. "Your people would accept a white woman? Some would struggle with it, as some of your people would struggle with us," Aiyana admitted honestly. "But my uncle values peace above all else. He would see our union as a bridge between our worlds, a sign that understanding is possible." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the enormity of the decision before her. "What kind of life would we have?" "Not an easy one," Aiyana said truthfully. "We would face prejudice from both sides. But Sarah, love like ours is rare. It deserves a chance to grow, whatever the obstacles." Sarah thought of her lonely existence on the ranch, the suspicious looks from townspeople, the emptiness that had filled her days since Thomas's death. Then she thought of the past few days with Aiyana, the trust that had grown between them, the tenderness in his touch, the way he looked at her as if she were precious beyond measure. "When would we leave?" she asked quietly. Aiyana's face lit up with hope. "You will come with me?" "I will come with you," Sarah confirmed, her decision crystallizing as she spoke the words. "This ranch holds too many memories of loss. You represent hope, a new beginning." They spent the next hour planning their departure. Aiyana would need several more days to fully heal before attempting the journey to his people's camp in the mountains. Sarah would use that time to prepare, selling her livestock to neighboring ranches and packing only what she could carry on horseback. "There is something else," Aiyana said, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. "Among my people, marriage requires a ceremony, but also a commitment made before the spirits of earth and sky. If you are willing, we could speak those vows now, under the stars that witnessed our meeting. Sarah looked up through the wagon's open canvas at the fading stars above. The idea of marrying this man, under the vast desert sky, with no witnesses but the eternal heavens, seemed perfect, more meaningful than any ceremony in a church that would never accept their union anyway. "I'm willing," she whispered. They climbed down from the wagon and walked hand in hand to a small rise behind Sarah's cabin, where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. As the sun painted the eastern mountains in shades of gold and rose, Aiyana spoke words in Apache, then translated them for Sarah. "I take you as my woman, Sarah McKenna, before the spirits of my ancestors and yours. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and love you for all the days the sun rises. Will you take me as your man?" "I take you as my husband, Aiyana Taza," Sarah replied, her voice strong and clear in the morning air. "Before God and the spirits of this land, I promise to stand beside you, to follow where love leads us, and to build a life of hope from the ashes of old fears." They sealed their vows with a kiss as the sun crested the mountains, bathing them both in golden light. In that moment, they were not Apache and white settler, warrior and rancher's widow. They were simply two people who had found something precious in each other, something worth risking everything to protect. 3 days later, as Sarah McKenna rode away from her ranch beside her Apache husband, she didn't look back. The past was behind them, filled with loss and loneliness and the prejudices of two worlds that couldn't see beyond old hatreds. Ahead lay the mountains where Aiyana's people made their home, and a future where love had triumphed over fear. Their journey would not be easy, but as they rode into the sunrise together, both knew they had found something that no amount of hardship could destroy, a love strong enough to build bridges between worlds, and hearts brave enough to cross them. The wagon Sarah had bought for $3 sat empty behind them, its canvas fluttering in the desert wind like a banner of surrender to the old ways. But it had served its purpose, bringing together two souls who were meant to find each other across the vast expanse of the American frontier. Love, as it turned out, was the greatest bargain of all.